continue with the meeting. So I'll move from the chair that Baden's apology be accepted. Second, Anne. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Conflict of interest, I think we all know. If there's a conflict along the way, please let me know about that. Confirmation of the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on Wednesday the 24th of November 2021. Happy to move from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Anne again, thank you. Simon, thank you, Simon. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Morning, Ross. Thank you. Right, so we'll get right into the business. Agenda item number 4, which is the monitoring of the Hastings Residential Intensification Design Guide. So Anna, it's over to you. And look, what we'll do, we'll hold all questions till you've finished your presentation, okay?
Yes, okay, thank you, Councillor.
And that'll give you a good fair run. Okay, so welcome, Anna, and in your hands.
Thank you. So the last time we brought the design guide to you was in November 2020. Christine, if you could just flick through to the next slide, please. You asked us to monitor the guide over a 12-month period to see how effective it was. And one of the things you were concerned about was whether it would have enough teeth, or whether it needed to have or how we could include it into a more regulatory framework of the district plan. So over the past 12 months, we have monitored it. We've looked at consent data, we've surveyed users as well. Next slide, please, Christine. So users of the guide have told us through the survey that they think the guide is really helpful. It's a good way of showing clients what's expected and what's acceptable. It helps to encourage more density and more yield out of developments. So on the whole, it's been really positive, but there were a few ideas for improvement, namely identifying more areas for intensification. There were some comments that the guide was subjective. And so, you know, this is something that we look to manage. So when we're looking at proposals, we're looking and evaluating them as to whether they meet the intent of the design guide elements and principles. And there are a number of ways that, or solutions that can be used to achieve the principles. And when we're looking at proposals, we're always evaluating them in a group of policy planners, you know, 2 or 3 planners together to make sure that comments are balanced. Next slide, Christine. So how has the guide influenced the uptake of, or encouraged the uptake of comprehensive residential development? Because that was one of the objectives of the guide, was to try and encourage more multi-unit development. So the consent data shows that over the past 12 months, we've had 88 consents granted for residential activities, and about half of these were for the traditional infill type development. And 11 resource consent applications were granted for comprehensive multi-unit developments. But that would yield approximately, those 11 resource consent applications would have a yield of approximately 60 dwellings. When you're looking at those 11 resource consent applications, 5 of those applicants used the guide prior to lodging their resource consent application, and whereas the other 6, the guide was used to provide feedback during the resource consent process. And when you look at how long it took to grant those resource consent applications. You can see that using the guide prior to lodgements really speeds up and simplifies the process. I think they were granted consent an average of 6 days earlier than the 6 applications that used the design guide post lodgement. Next slide, Christine. So the design guide has really helped to get higher quality design outcomes. So it's helped to get better site layouts, more houses fronting the street and connecting with the street, better streetscape outcomes, so better landscaping, more variety in elevations where there's similar or the same type of dwelling design is used. Better livability, so more outdoor spaces having north-facing sunny aspect and more living areas directly facing or directly accessing onto these outdoor living spaces. It's also helped get greater diversity in dwelling typology, so more duplex type units and more two-story type dwellings. And this has also helped to increase yield. Next slide, Christine. So how we're using the guide in practice, most users told us that they use the guide to help with their concept development of their projects. It's also used to assist in working out solutions to design or layout issues. And so we've used the guide as a way to open conversations with developers and planners and architects. And it's really created a collaborative nature of working. So design is a really iterative process, and there are likely many solutions to a proposal to achieve the intent of the design guide. And over working with developers and planners and architects over the past year, we've really built some good relationships, and we're starting to see that relationship building paying off. We're getting architects and planners directly referring clients to come to us for feedback at the early design stage of their project. And we're mindful that we really need to respond quickly to these requests. So we tend to ensure that we've got a consistent voice from the policy team by discussing each project in a group and reaching a consensus before providing feedback. And we always have the ability to call in an expert urban designer if there's more difficult or contentious issues. Next slide, please, Christine. So I'd just like to show you a couple of examples of where the design guide has made a difference. So this site is in our city living zone, which is the best area for medium density housing. The developer that we worked with here had never done comprehensive development before, but he was keen to get involved in it. And initially he had just, his proposal was for 3 single dwellings on the site, but we encouraged him to look at a different typology, being the duplex for the front lot. And as he worked through the process, he became more comfortable with that idea and ended up getting consent for that. And this is now being constructed at the moment. Next slide, please, Christine. This development is in Havelock North. It is in the mixed use zone. And we've met with this developer probably 5 or 6 times over the process of their project. And initially they thought they would get about 5 or 6 dwellings on the site. But by using a 2-story and duplex typology, they ended up being able to achieve 8 duplex units. This proposal also had some traffic issues, so we were able to get the traffic engineers on board to discuss those issues early and find solutions for them. So it was really a collaborative approach, which worked really well. Next slide, please, Christine. So from all the past 12 months, the learnings that we've had, we have recommended that the principles and design elements of the guide be included as assessment criteria into the district plan. So over the past 12 months, the consent planners have been using the guide to evaluate resource consents, and they've used it under section 104 of the Resource Management Act, which enables them to consider other matters. But by including the design guide elements and principles into the district plan assessment criteria for particular activities, it would provide much more strength to the need to comply with these matters. Next slide, please, Christine. So we think that using assessment criteria to guide development of good design outcomes would work much better than standards or rules, because standards or rules need to be rigid, they need to be specific and measurable, whereas assessment criteria are a lot more flexible and they encourage creativity. They can take into account site variables and context, and thereby encourage variety in housing and layout design. So we think that having the design outcomes or the design principles and design elements in the district plan will really raise the profile of the guide, and it will reinforce its early use to ensure a simpler and more straightforward consenting process for these types of developments. Next slide, please, Christine. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anna. And Murray, welcome. I can't see you, but I've been told you are there on Zoom, so welcome to the meeting. Right, questions? Oh, Nio too. Welcome, Nio.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Apologies for my late arrival.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Questions on Anna's presentation?
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much, Anna. And you know, this is I like the direction that you're taking us about including this in district plan. My question is around KO. Have they been interested in being part of looking at our design guide? I mean, what we're trying to do is as the design guide shows, is lift the quality of design across our district. And so are we able to get the government to engage in that, or is that very much just some of our own developers?
No, we have had comment from Kāinga Ora on the design guide itself, and they have been quite positive about the guide. They can see its value in terms of getting good design outcomes. The one, I guess, work on they have raised is that some of the district plan rule framework doesn't facilitate what the guide wants, and so there is a need to look at some of those specific rules.
Thank you. And for just a follow-up question through you, Chair, I think that's a really valid point. I think that's why we need to be looking at this next steps. I'm really interested in your case study of Burnett Street versus Havelock Road. And I'm really interested to understand, in terms of higher density, and would the, you know, is that something that when our people meet and show them the design guide, is there the conversation around higher density? It's an old part of town, it's close to Cornwall Park, it's a lovely, lovely area. And I just wonder about, you know, the opportunity to engage with the developers to get some higher density instead of just the low density work that we are offered in Hastings. I know it's a cost to go 2-story, but just wondering how we address that. John?
Just through you, Mr. Chair. Megan, I think you've been involved in, and Anna have been involved in negotiations. What I've struck, mainly because Wallace come through me to some of these discussions, is they're now requesting a copy, a digital copy or a copy each time they do a development. Those companies are looking to use two-story typologies and possibly three, along here at Tonga Street and Silver, that corner site. And the reason for that is just they're much more experienced. So what you are still seeing is some of the developers aren't used to the two-story typology and the design of that, but that's changing quite rapidly. Like Vision Homes, they've come in about 2 sites using two-story ones, offset, and they're already done about, say, 25 of those style of homes along Marine Parade and Ahuriri. So you kind of get people who are familiar with it. They move reasonably quickly because they know it. There's no surprises. But Megan or Anna or Ryan, would you like to comment on the kind of discussions you've had?
Good morning, everybody. Over the last year, Anna and I have spoken, and the other Anna have spoken to quite a lot of developers in the space, and I think John's right. Yeah, the local developers are more comfortable with doing single story, and they've talked about the feasibility, the financial feasibility of two-story, etc., being for them sometimes a little bit of a bridge too far, but I've had recent discussions with a much larger developer who wants to get into the space, and they are wanting to do two-story as well. So it's just sort of building on from when we launched this a year ago, people getting more confidence in it, I think.
Yes, I agree with Megan's comments. I think, through you, Chair, sorry. I think that developers are transitioning, and I think that's going to take a little bit of time. And I think the same with this design guide. They started off with a little bit of reluctance, but now they can start to see some of the positives. As Anna outlined, some of the local ones are just saying, oh, they've never thought of putting a duplex and getting more yield out of their site. And I think those things are building. And I know that the Iona development, they're looking at showcasing some of the sort of duplex developments and really building a very high quality ones. And I think as that starts to happen, you'll get more market demand as well. So I think it's just a matter of transitioning through.
And it was very interesting, the redevelopment of Ahuriri. You kind of went from, those tiny little cottages in the back street of Waghorn Street, and in the top end by the Union Hotel, they built precast tilt panel ones that looked like a wall store, and they rounded out about 110 square metres, and they were two-storied. So what happened is, initially everyone said, oh, look, they'll be a flop, and they all sold for around $500,000. Now you wouldn't buy one for under 1.2. And so other developers say, oh, heck, look what Mackesy did, developers did, look what Wallace did, look what Vision Homes, and wrongly or rightly, their view is that, oh, well, they're in there because there's a lot of profit. So they start to look at and they contact their designers, and that's how things change. Because sometimes, your advisors might be only used to doing single story, and you've got to possibly change your designers, the engineers, But you see that transition, that took maybe 8 to 10 years. And now you're getting townhouse developments of 4 stories on West Quay. You're getting 2 to 3 back in the Battery Road area. So, and I don't know if you've seen the typology stuff you've seen in the old bowling club, that site. That's 3 to 4. And you look at what's happening now in Havelock, in that 29 Havelock Road, plus David Mackesy's ones, looking out onto the park. It's starting to build. We're hoping that we can take on a field trip and show you a whole lot more, over the next year. And that would be a kind of measure of success, visiting these sites.
Right.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. No, that's a good point, because in the early days, Papakainga was really a plan provision, and then the likes of the developments that occurred at Waimarama, Bennett Road, all of those had slightly different styles, but quite a few of them had a communal kind of area. Like, you know, they had a gathering area in the middle, or they'd have shared facilities. So I know there was a little guide put out, and I think it was really looking over 10 or 12 different Papakainga and saying, look, these are some of the elements, but a lot of the design generally comes from the group that actually get it together, and Te Pūneri Kōkiri as well. So we're more than happy to update the kind of guidelines we've got, but we've just got to be very careful that that comes from the people who have developed them, and there's still that ability to change it, because different kind of groups, or iwi and hapu, approach it just slightly different. Like some will have, as an example, a communal area, and some will have an area where their older kuia live, but they want them mixed up, so they have them in different ways. So I think we'd be more than happy to update the guide we've got. I think that would be useful.
Thank you. Thanks, Nio. Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did have my light on. I took it off for feedback purposes.
So did I.
Oops. Sorry, he's in behind me now. My question is around about how this, I mean, thank you, Anna, for your presentation, and I really like the way this is heading, but I'm just wondering how this integrates with standards and rules, like, for instance, the new minimum height levels at the, you know, along the coast. Does that actually have any, are there any pointers in there as far as design goes? It's hard to read. Right. Thanks, Anna. Really, yeah, that was my question, was around about just how it integrates with the rules. But yeah, I see now, I've got it in front of me and I can actually read it, that my second question's been answered, and that was really about environmental impacts and how you discuss that with the designers. So thank you for that.
Dan Elwin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very supportive of this guide, and I'm very pleased to see the results that it's bringing. I've got two questions. One relates to the recommendation about including the guide in the district plan. Is the guide a living document that's able to be changed with time, or once it's in the district plan, or is it set in concrete once it's in the district plan? Is my first question. Sorry, I missed what you said.
the ingredients to good design?
Maybe just to help Councillor Elwyn, the design guideline, the actual guideline will be updated because the type of typologies, things will change and develop, but those basically good design principles will go forward. Like they might, even if they say, for instance, there's some different changing wording, they're fundamentally all the things you bring together for good design. So they'll always be reasonably constant, and you can do a district plan change if you feel that the criteria are getting out of date. Yeah. But the document itself needs to be continually updated. That's the document you've got in front of you there.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so there will be opportunity to update it, and if we have to, we do a district plan change.
Yeah, and it's no different to anything else. We've just got to keep an eye on these things because the rate of change is so rapid these days. Yeah. You can't leave it for long periods.
And my second question relates to some of the comments that came back from the survey. And it was about involving developers and designers or architects in the document. Were they involved in preparation of the document, and do you intend to have a workshop for developers and designers as a result of the feedback?
I can comment, Mr. Chair. We, you know how we have our development forums? It was actually launched there, and then we've had ongoing, there's been 2 or 3 architects who have come in regularly and talk to us about aspects. So now that the 12 month is up and we're due for another development forum, we'll just have to watch the COVID principles because we want to get as many people, but it's an ideal time just to, announce to them that we're going to do putting the criteria into the plan and then see if we can get some people to volunteer just to do a bit more of a working session on it. And I think the likes of, I know Hillary from HD Hunt Davies Tennant, I think Anne Galloway, there's a number of them that are interested. So I think that would be the right approach.
Thank you very much.
We'll just make a note that we need to do that.
Move, Chair, with the direction. Just a comment for an action, Chair. I think it'd be really worthwhile, and after hearing Anna's presentation, to hear the stats. I think it's a very worthwhile to be able to inform our community through media about the year, the trial, the design guide. So if you'd like to take that up, please, I think it would be very good to sort of put that information out into the public arena for people to understand what we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Wahitanga review, the second item on our agenda, and welcome Rowan. I'll hand this over to you.
Kia ora, thank you, Kevin, through Chair. We've got Wilson here, who's worked with me on this agenda item.
Welcome, Wilson.
So everyone's been anticipating the review of the Wahitanga section, and it's we're really pleased to be able to start this process. One of the things that we wanted to do before we started was to make sure that we got proper guidance from both the Heretaunga Takatanoa committee and yourselves and this committee. And I think one of the previous aspects of the previous reviews of Wahitanga were that they weren't perhaps a true partnership, and that is one of the things that we wanted to achieve through this. It is a partnership with Hapu as we work through this process. So the identification of Wāhi Tonga in the district plan is a really important component of the Resource Management Act, and it is going to be even more so when we get the reviewed the amendments to the new planning framework. The Natural and Built Environments Act puts even greater emphasis on this relationship and bringing it forward into the district plan. So while it's going to be a nomination process for Wāhi Tonga sites, it's also important that the plan reflects the Māori worldview as well into the plan, and that's something that we can start working on in terms of our mana whenua section 3 of the plan. So that will go in conjunction with the Wāhi Tonga nomination process. It is something also that we can possibly do as part of our national planning standards and bringing the district plan into the national planning standards framework. So we may, be able to include that without necessarily going out and making a formal plan change to introduce the Māori worldview into the plan. But the nomination of sites, as I said, it has to be carefully thought through because there is sort of an element of nervousness among hapu about how those sites are handled, and we want to draw on the expertise that Mangahururu Tangatu Trust have achieved through putting forward, I think, something like 100 different sites so far in the plan through the plan review process. So we're hoping to work with them to set up some templates that could be used, for other hapu nominating sites and give them some confidence in how on the information that needs to be provided, and then how it's recorded in the district plan and incorporated into council records. Is there anything you would like to add on that, Wilson?
I suppose it's just a case of there is a need for mana whenua to be comfortable with the process and having sites registered within council systems. So Mangahururu Tangi 2 was successful in applying for sites to be registered underneath the confidentiality agreement. This is supported by Section 72 of the Resource Management Act, which allows for the protection of information if it pertains to Wāhi Tonga, Wāhi Tapu sites in meetings and hearings. So this is another pathway for us to ensure that there can be protection of Wāhi Tonga sites while also ensuring that the information remains confidential to the hapu and the marae. Kia ora.
Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I mean, for myself, reading through this report, I can understand that when two cogs are in mesh and working together, the outcome is far greater than two cogs that are out in the left field and the right field and they're not engaged. So I thought this was this is a great pathway we're on. So I'm really interested to hear Mare Naio, your comments. Mare.
Yep. Yes, we can.
For those of us that were back at the time when Matthew Campbell had undertaken that first phase, challenges that we have are going to be with private landowner individuals. And of course, there's no second guessing, as the previous report indicates, the expanse of urban peri-growth that's going into areas of high cultural sensitivity. And I think there's a role in there for not only the private developer, which, you know, the intent in mind here, particularly say to carve off some of the park or a station under the current district policy, farm park tends to arrive in places that were formerly occupied by our ancestors. And of course, then the whole conversation then turns to be facilitated directly, in this particular case, with the developer owner and the mana whenua. That's a very, very difficult situation. I would just want to put this to the committee insofar as the role that the Hastings District Council should play in this triangulated conversation. Picture this situation when you negotiate with a landowner that fundamentally has to cough up with the cost of undertaking, say, a cultural impact assessment or cultural aspirations report. In their mind, they're thinking, well, we've got to stump up with some resource to pay for this. And as a writer of these technical reports, I will say to the developer that there's no guarantee that at the outcome of this exercise and providing your report, you may find that the hapu are going to be vehemently opposed over the extent of land areas that currently have unregistered sites. So there's a double motion that's going on here at the moment and trying to get ahead. I would highly suggest and recommend that the council in itself be an instrument that enables getting ahead of this charge, this splurge that's now going on of farm parks and development, particularly peri-urban, as we're starting to go into some of these places, rather than leave it right up to the point where an applicant or a developer comes and you've only got a certain short time frame pre-application to engage. So these challenges of the obligation is going to be primarily put to mana whenua and a developer to facilitate that process, and realising too also there's been some great work that I want to acknowledge that's been going on in the unit, particularly with Wilson, Charles and of course with you, Rowan. And I would like to think that the council has an obligation to support that whole process, just get ahead of itself. We know that with these new reforms that are coming on to replace the RMA with spatial planning, urban design, that council should also look at, let's get ahead of where potentially these new built areas are going to be located. And if they are around sensitive areas, why can't we get ahead of it? So I'll just pose that for the time being. Kia ora.
Thank you, Murray. Very good points. And I'm just going to ask John O'Shaughnessy to respond to that, please.
Through you, Chair, I'll respond on that. It's a really good point that you're raising, Murray, in relation to that. And it is something that we are now factoring into our structure planning process. So, you know, the structure plans that we are now just starting to commence for Lyndhurst, the identified Lyndhurst extension and Kaiapo Road, we will be, you know, undertaking, getting the cultural assessment as part of the structure plan, and it wasn't something that we had done previously. So I think that is a way forward in trying to deal with those issues that you raised, but yeah, it's a really good point.
And following on through you, Mr. Chair, I guess what you're talking really about, Mara, is, you know, like the one we found with Mr. Harrison up on Tomato Peak. And then also when you look across the valley, we've had that whole forestry block removed and we're going to get a farm park coming. So where we know about these things from our development meetings, because what happens is the resource consent staff generally have an idea, like, you know, how everyone gets that list of things happening. We're going to have to try and keep a closer eye on that and identify the ones that are likely to be in those areas where we know iwi hapu have, you know, of time occupied those areas. So we can see quite a lot of the effective that valley and down the back road to Te Wonga being a very desirable area for farm parks. And immediately, then it's going to raise those issues. So I agree, it's always just priority and resourcing, but we're going to try and identify those ahead of time. And I think, you know, maybe a good thing for Wilson is just to keep an eye on those ones. And, you know, if we see ones and that we think are areas, having a chat with you and saying, hey, look, can we talk to the surveyor really early on and say, hey, can they commission that work? Because if they're aware of it, then it doesn't come as a surprise. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, John. Nio.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. You can thank me or blame me for the change from Wāhi Tapu to Wāhi Taonga register as well, part of the mediation, I don't know how many years ago, Rowan, 6, 8 maybe years ago, and also writing this definition, or helping writing this definition of Wāhi Taonga while having lunch at the East Pier with Maunga Hareru. So it does say it includes but not limited to, and in retrospect, I think I sort of left some omissions. So just to give some background, why it changed from Wāhi Tapu to Wāhi Taonga. Of course, Wāhi Tapu is in the RMA, the Section 6E, but it's limited to areas that are tapu, and we wanted to protect areas that are also taonga. And like our mahinga kai. So that's the omission. I don't know why I didn't include mahinga kai in their mahinga kai sites. It's been a wāhi taonga, and of course, pertaining to kai, they're not tapu, so they're taonga. But it's not limited, but there should be a consideration or amendment to that definition if we were ever to get there. I'll commend council for working with Maunga Hareru, because obviously they put in a lot of sites. But I'd just like to note that, you know, in relative history, being here for 1,000 years, you can have a lot of history, and that gives some context to the number of sites they included. So thank you for working with them, but just those, I guess that background for wider consideration to what's a taonga and to be protected, like mahinga kai. And in our Māori worldview, you know, these are our mahinga kai is our kind of cultural commerce, direct connection to the environment where they can sustain us. And I've seen this exhibited by many whānau and hapu where it's been lost and they've been adversely impacted on, unable to carry on their culture or their tradition as being Māori. So I commend the council for taking an initiative and working with our hapu, particularly Maunga Hareru, who's got the resources to invest in this. I'm of the opinion that yes, we have to record these sites if we want to protect them. I know there's a lot of unease amongst our whānau on what may happen, but I'm support, well, if we don't, it's harder to restore or protect after the fact. So, and also like to note, this is for the district plan, but it is a tool outside Hastings. Obviously in the district plan, there is protection of watercourses, and I see Lake Runanga and parts of the Ngaruroro and other parts of waterways are protected, but they come under the area of regional council again. So perhaps there's a question there within the scope of, you know, protecting sites from inappropriate use and development. And how do you do that with a waterway when that's really not the business of council? So, and do you work with other councils who do not have the same kind of detailed register as Hastings? Job.
Okay, thank you, Nio. Now, are there any Sorry, no more questions, so we'll move to the recommendation, which is on page 16. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Anne, happy to move. Somebody like to second that recommendation? Murray? Moved and
Yep.
seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. On the contrary, carried. I think this is a great way forward, and thank you everybody for all the hard work that's been put in. And we're really on a great journey here, so well done. That concludes the formal items on the agenda, but I know Anne did want to raise one point. So Anne, I'll hand this over to you briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Just under minor items, and I'm...
Stop the live stream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't care if it's live streamed or not. I think it'll come up later. So under minor items, it's around about cell phone